What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, the Indianapolis Colts, they're shaping up to have a top 10 offense this year. Nobody's talking about it right now, but I'm going to break it down for you guys real quick. Before we get into it, just want to say this episode is presented by Prize Picks. Be sure to visit the Prize Picks app today and be sure to use the code BTJ for a $100 deposit match when you sign up. Now, guys, this last season, offensively, it was a different marvel when it came to the Indianapolis Colts. Under first-year head coach Shane Steichen, there was a lot of pressure amongst the Indianapolis Colts offense to finally getting it going. In 2022, the Indianapolis Colts saw historically one of the worst offenses that we had seen in modern NFL history, let alone one of the worst offenses that we've seen in franchise history. So in 2022, a lot of people were insanely let down by a lot of people, including the coaching staff and some of the players that were traded in to try to improve this offense and saw how bad it became. But in 2023, there was optimism for the Indianapolis Colts. You had a new head coach in Shane Steichen, who was labeled as a quarterback's coach and an offensive wizard when it comes to play calling. And we had new quarterback Anthony Richardson, who came in, and the Colts were looking to hopefully get a spark out of Anthony Richardson. And then, of course, with the first-round pick getting hurt in only his fourth game as a Indianapolis Colt, ended up having to have a surgery that sidelined his season and will look to be returning this year and looking to be better than ever. But then you had the situation with Gardner Minshew coming in and being the starting quarterback for the remainder of the year, but was as the backup to start the year. Then, of course, there were a lot of other things that went wrong for the Indianapolis Colts, mainly just had to do with the fact that Jonathan Taylor was out for the majority of the year. And I wouldn't even say it's necessarily a majority, but it was definitely a good chunk of it. Remember, he did not play until week 5 against the Tennessee Titans. And really, Jonathan Taylor did not start seeing significant snaps till about week 8 against the New Orleans Saints. So it was definitely quite a while before Jonathan Taylor really became a vital part of this offense. And remember, in the final few weeks of the season was back to dealing with some kinds of injuries. Even despite that, was still able to put on a masterclass of performances despite the injury. And now this year, he comes in ready to go. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But again, guys, I want to talk about why this Indianapolis Colts offense can be a top 10 offense this year in spite of everything that's happening. And some people maybe don't quite understand it. But let me talk about, in order to understand why they could be a top 10 offense this year, you have to talk about their numbers last year. So to break this down for you, 15th overall last year for the Indianapolis Colts in regards to total offensive yardage last season. So that puts you right in the middle of the pack with NFL teams. And, you know, for a lot of people, and we saw how sometimes this offense was very limited under Gardner Minshew as the quarterback. Shane Steichen had to develop a whole new playbook, a whole new style of how to approach the game, and they had to go off of what Gardner Minshew could do best. And despite that, still was an average NFL offense in this league. And again, missing Jonathan Taylor, your most explosive weapon for the majority of the year. And then when you go to the passing yardage, you were 20th in this regard last year. And then in rushing, you were 10th best in yardage, and you were the 11th best team last year in points. So it is definitely going to be an interesting tidbit here. So let's start with offensively. Where can we go to say that the Indianapolis Colts will jump from 15th all the way into the top 10? How are they going to do that? Well, there is a couple ways that they can do it. There are going to be teams offensively this next year that are not going to be as explosive. You look at teams like the Minnesota Vikings that were knocking inside that top 10 offensively for yardage. I don't think they're going to quite be the same. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think they'll drop. I think the Indianapolis Colts can move ahead of the New Orleans Saints this next year. They were only 7 yards behind them in total offense this last year. And say there's a team in the top 10 that has something happen. If the Colts remain healthy, there is no shot that this team stays out of the top 10 offensively. Looking at yardage from last season and how the Indianapolis Colts will be healthier this year, and that was the main reason why it was a average offense to sometimes above average offense when it mattered. Now, looking at the remainder of this, going into 2023 before we get into 2024's roster. Remember, in those last 9 games for the Indianapolis Colts, I just want to remind everybody, like, this offense was not always hot. Remember, there was a chunk of this part of the middle part of the season when the Indianapolis Colts could not score an offensive touchdown for the likes of them. Remember, in the last 9 games, the Indianapolis Colts failed to record a single passing touchdown in 5 of those games. So 5 of the last 9 games that the Indianapolis Colts played in the 2023 season went that entire game without scoring an offensive passing touchdown. And the Indianapolis Colts actually only had 7 total passing touchdowns in the final 9 games of the season. So again, just to give you disparity of that, in those 4 games in which we did throw passing touchdowns, you did see where they only threw 7. So there wasn't a huge disparity there. Just basically showing that was a bad offensive product. Now, again, the rushing team was able to make it work. Again, with the Indianapolis Colts, your offensive line got better last year. Jonathan Taylor got back to being healthy. Zach Moss was finally able to come back. And then when you had that dual threat going, you were able to capitalize completely on Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss being on the field. And throughout the entirety of the year, with Zach Moss taking over while Jonathan Taylor was out, Zach Moss still did a great job of being able to take over and still carry the offense on his back, right? But what we saw last year, again, this was not a potent passing offense. Now, will it be under Anthony Richardson? That is still up for debate because a lot of teams will still sit there and say, do really, like, I mean, how can we possibly sit here and say that Anthony Richardson will do better than Gardner Minshew did in the games in which Gardner Minshew played? Again, Gardner Minshew played in 13 games last year, guys, only had 15 passing touchdowns. If we're really going to sit there and say that in Anthony Richardson's first 13 games, if you don't believe that Anthony Richardson can get 15 passing touchdowns, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I know that the main part of Anthony Richardson's game is his running ability. And I know this year he's going to play smarter, which probably means there's going to be a few less runs in which he's looking to capitalize on. Either way, I still firmly believe that Anthony Richardson is going to have more than 15 passing touchdowns this next year. I don't see that as an issue, especially even in his first 12 games. Remember, this guy's practically still a rookie. And he's still got to learn. He's got to get better. He's only 22 years old. This guy's still so young. He's 2 years younger than Michael Penix coming into the NFL. So Anthony Richardson's going to have a lot of this knowledge. He's going to have a lot of this understanding of how this offense is supposed to be ran, even if he's not had a ton of time on the field himself because of the injuries last year. But again, like I said, with the passing offense, yardage-wise, it will probably be close to the same, but I would imagine it could probably be a little bit better. This offense certainly wasn't anything spectacular throwing the football. I do have a feeling that our numbers will go up a little bit this year. Do I think that we'll have more passing yards than teams like maybe the Chargers or the Packers or the Bengals? No. But I do firmly believe that the Indianapolis Colts can be a top 15 passing offense, or right there in that fringe 14 to 16 passing offense, and be that average passing offense in regards to total passing yards. Okay, just as far as passing yards, because remember, the Baltimore Ravens last year had less passing yards than the Indianapolis Colts throughout the season. So again, it's not always about the yardage that you get from the passing yards. And I'll get to why the rest of it is more important, actually. Again, with the Colts being 10th in rushing last year, I know you're going to not have Zach Moss back in the fold for this team going forward. But if Jonathan Taylor remains mostly healthy and Anthony Richardson remains mostly healthy, then there is no reason to believe that this offense will slow down in any way when it comes to the rushing department. As a matter of fact, I'd like to think it would actually increase in production with Anthony Richardson in that fold. When your offensive line is as good as it is for the Indianapolis Colts, they have a top 5 offensive line unit in the NFL right now. And Anthony Richardson, who is also a threat to run with his legs, but because of that, teams have to be aware of that potential, and therefore you give that split second for Jonathan Taylor to be able to utilize that somebody's eyes may not be focused on him for a split second. That can lead to bigger and better plays from Jonathan Taylor, which will increase his offensive output, which will make us an even better rushing team. So this team is 100% going to be a top 10 rushing team next year. If Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson remain healthy, there's no question about it. They will be better than what they were in 2023, and they were already really dang good. So if you have an average passing offense from yardage, and then you have a top 10 rushing team attack from rushing the football, the only other thing you can point to is points per game. As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Now, what is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you, and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use code BTJ for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code BTJ for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, it's sponsored by Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And the amount of points that you get throughout the season. And again, the Indianapolis Colts were the 11th best. They were tied for 10th last season, actually, for the most points in the season with 396, which averages out to over 23 points per game. And the Indianapolis Colts, they were 11th last year. I do firmly believe we would be higher this next season. I mean, just to give you some context on what we can expect. I mean, the New Orleans Saints last year had more points. Now, again, when you talk about what Anthony Richardson can do, Anthony Richardson, when they were in the red zone, right? I will just say, in the few minimal times that Anthony Richardson was in the red zone when he was healthy, the Indianapolis Colts scored a touchdown every time that Anthony Richardson was in the red zone, because the Colts can dial up so many different formations. It doesn't matter if there's limited field to play with, because Anthony Richardson holds that ability to run the football. You can get creative, especially in goal line situations. Now, remember, in the last several years, that was one thing we always said was a really bad thing for the Indianapolis Colts under Frank Reich. The Colts could never score in goal line situations. They were actually, I think they were one of the worst teams in the NFL at scoring inside the 5-yard line. Like, that they were terrible at it. And that's so bad to think about, especially when you pride yourself in having an offensive line that is so great and a running back that is so great. Even if the team knows what you're running, you should still be able to figure it out. But now you have a situation with Shane Steichen, who gets so much more creative with the play calling. It doesn't put so much pressure on the offensive line and on Jonathan Taylor to make things work. You're able to throw so many different formations out there. Defenses don't know what they're going to expect. You could be throwing it. You could be running it. You could be running sweeps. You could be running cuts. You could be running fades. It could be anything. And that is where the Indianapolis Colts are going to thrive with Anthony Richardson on the offense and versus Gardner Minshew. Now, again, Gardner Minshew was not terrible last year by any stretch of the imagination when it came to being in the red zone. But he was also limited in some of the things that you could run. You can't run the option plays as well with Gardner Minshew as you could with Anthony Richardson. So you're already taking an offense that was good last year, that was really good last year inside the 10, and now you're just making it exponentially better with Anthony Richardson because his skill set leaves defenses in a bind. They don't know what to do. So that is where it becomes such a huge benefactor for you. Just look at the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen, right? Josh Allen has those abilities to do the things that he does because of his skill set and his determination to score touchdowns in any way, shape, or form. So the Indianapolis Colts will be able to do that with Anthony Richardson, but in a more creative way. And so when we look at this, guys, again, last year, the Indianapolis Colts, they were a average offense throughout the period of the year. They were not a great passing offense. They were a really good rushing offense and a really good offense at scoring the ball. Surprisingly, given the fact that we couldn't pass the ball at all. But again, there were stretches at times last year where the Indianapolis Colts offense was non-existent. And not only non-existent, but they were non-existent against some of the worst teams that we faced last year. The Carolina Panthers, the Indianapolis Colts failed to score a passing touchdown on the Carolina Panthers, failed to throw a passing touchdown against the New England Patriots, failed to throw a touchdown against the Buccaneers, who had a bottom 10 defensive backfield. And then we're unable to throw a passing touchdown, or we're unable to do much against the Bengals defense that was struggling going into that. You couldn't do anything against the Falcons, who don't have an insanely great pass coverage team. And again, even against the Texans in the final game of the year, Gardner Minshew didn't throw for a touchdown there. So it's just it's one of those situations where, again, the Indianapolis Colts, they were streaky at times. And there will probably be times as well this upcoming year with Anthony Richardson because of him still being new. But there will also be times where it's not going to stretch out. It'll probably be over a span of 2, maybe even 3 games potentially. But there's going to be times when the offense is going at a phenomenal pace. Remember, at the beginning of the year for Anthony Richardson, and this was his first few games as a pro, right? Had 1 rushing touchdown and then 1 passing touchdown in the Jacksonville game, in which he probably wishes he could have done a little bit more. He had 2 rushing touchdowns against the Texans week 2 in the first 5 minutes. He probably would have had at least 1 passing touchdown in that game had he not gone out with a concussion. And then, of course, against the Rams, had 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown against the Rams to force it into overtime. And then against the Titans, he was looking fantastic. He was throwing the ball really well before he ultimately went down with the injury that cost him his season. Would have most likely had a touchdown as well in that game had he been able to finish. So I know there's the big question. Is he going to remain healthy? I'm not asking or answering that question here. I'm simply stating if he is healthy, there is no doubt that this is a top 10 offense for the Indianapolis Colts with a quarterback that is like a Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson combo in that regard, a running back who, when healthy, is a top 5 running back in this league, a wide receiver core that has Michael Pittman, who is a top 15, 20 wide receiver in this league. And you have a plethora of role wide receivers, and Alec Pierce, who was not utilized to his full ability last year as a vertical threat because of Gardner Minshew. Josh Downs, who set the franchise record for most catches by a rookie. And then Adonai Mitchell, who you're adding to this already studded young wide receiver group. And then an offensive line that is decked out top 5 when it is at its peak. And then tight end wise, I didn't even mention your potentially best weapon in Jelani Woods, who in 2022 was one of the only few bright spots you had as a team offensively when he was a rookie. And then every time he touched the ball, felt like it was either a first down or a touchdown. That weapon is coming back into the offense this year. So if everyone remains healthy, if most of these guys remain healthy throughout the year, even if some of these guys were to go out, you still have other options. If your best guys remain mostly healthy, this offense has every opportunity to be a top 10 offense in this league this year. And especially points-wise, they are 100% going to be a top rushing offense and a top 10 point scoring offense this year as well. So let me know what you guys think of this. Do you believe the Indianapolis Colts will have a top 10 offense this year? Or are you guys thinking that's a pipe dream? But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this. Thank you so much. And as always, go Colts.